To another video. In this video, we are going to learn how to scale down our models to prepare them for output on the CNC. Now we're going to scale down the full-size model, this assembly, so that it can be milled out of 9mm thick MDF. Now these parts, this here, are kind of set up to be milled out of 18mm material, and I can determine that a couple of ways. But one easy way is to use the measure tool. I press I on the keyboard and then I just click between two different edges and I can see right away that my distance is 18mm. So that's 18mm thick, and I'll just close that and then zoom in here, and you can see that we've got our parts fitting nice and snug together with a dog bone in there so that the square part can fit in there smoothly. Of course, we know that these dog bones are essential if we want to be able to cut them out, cut out the edges of a square, because the end mill, of course, is round, and we know that the size of it based on the tool diameter. Now, in the case of our CNC, typically we use a 6mm end mill, and so that's the size of this dog bone fillet, where you can get in there and measure it. And of course, we could measure that one too. If I bring up I and measure it, you can see that it's actually set to a 6mm diameter. It's actually 6.1. That's because that is the parameter I set for that. Let's take a look at those parameters right now. So under Modify, I bring up my parameters, and you can see that we have set tool diameter to 6.1mm, and that's because we leave a little bit of extra size to just give the tool some clearance while it's milling. And of course, our material thickness is set to 18mm. That was the size that we measured earlier and when we inspected those two edges. So what's the problem? Why can't I just send this and or shrink it down to 9mm when we could? I mean, I could scale it, and if I actually previously scaled this, and if I scale it down 50%, it looks okay. I mean, I did a 50% scale operation. I can right click that and say Edit Feature to see that we actually set the scale factor to 0.5, and that's going to be 50%. So what's the problem? The problem is that the size now of this dog bone here, that's going to be too small. And if I inspect it, you'll see that it's now been reduced. The diameter is now down to exactly half of what it was before. So now it's 3.05mm. The problem is that the end mill, the physical tool that we use to cut the material, is still 6.1mm. We've got a problem. So how do we overcome this? Well, the answer is that we change the size of the dog bones before we do our scale. So I've rolled back in the timeline, and I'm going to now go into my parameters, change the size of the tool diameter to double. I'm going to set it now to 12.2, and I'm going to have these ginormous dog bones. Now that's double the size that we need, and right now it doesn't look okay, but in the end it's going to be all right, because we're going to shrink that whole thing down by 50% now. And what happens is that now that dog bone, although it's oversized, it will be okay for us to mill using our actual physical tool, which has that 6.1mm diameter. Again, I inspect that arc, and we can see it's now the diameter 6.1, and it's perfectly fine. Our end mill can get in there, it can cut that out. I'll just turn off the part there so you can see it can get in there and cut that, no problem. And then you'd be able to put together the parts when you're testing your mock-up at 50% scale. So that's the technique. Before you do your scale operation, you set the parameter to double the size. And there it is. We set our parameter to double the size, and then we scale down. I had already done the scale operation, and I brought up that edit for you. But in case you're curious, the scale operations right here under the Modify menu. Really easy to do. Just follow your nose. You just fill in the 0.5 scale and it'll work just fine. There you go. That is how you prepare your files for outputting your 50% scale MDF mockup.